Welcome back to Media7, where we're surveying the latest developments in the Wikileaks saga. I'm joined now by John Stevenson, who interviewed Wikileaks apostate Daniel Domscheit-Berg for us, and former Guardian comments editor Toby Manhire, who edited the Guardian's Wikileaks book. Now, just for the sake of information, what was the context of the interview that you did for us with Daniel Domscheit-Berg? Where were you?
It was at a public meeting organised by the Danish newspaper Information, which is a small newspaper but very highly thought of, which specialises in public interest issues, and they put on an evening in Copenhagen. It was packed, they had to turn people away, and the interview was arranged by senior journalists at that paper the following day.
So who turns up to these things? Is there a transparency community in Europe?
The people that turned up were surprisingly normal, people from all walks of life, students, retirees, people who work for government departments. One guy who spoke and asked the question said, you know, I'm a public servant, and then everyone laughed because he talked about, you know, the difficulties of leaking information. But I think anyone that was there really had an interest in, you know, current affairs and in basically holding the powers that be to account. There's a real public sphere in Denmark, I had the sense, that there isn't in New Zealand.
So clearly, even without the glamour of Julian Assange, there was an interest in the topic.
I think people who showed up were interested in some of the lessons that could be learnt from the Wikileaks saga thus far, and also where to go from here. And I think it's fair to say that some of them had a lot of questions and concern about perhaps the amount of power that was concentrated or appeared to be concentrated in the hands of one person. And also I think a lot of the people that were there were very concerned about issues such as who gets to decide what information gets released and what doesn't. So it was a very interesting meeting.
Now, whether Julian Assange is a journalist has proved to be one of life's unanswerable questions. It seems quite clear that Domscheit-Berg does not regard himself as a journalist. He's quite clear on that, isn't he?
His remit, or the remit he seems to be setting out for open leaks, is one that seems to me much more limited than what the people at Wikileaks aim to do. He is essentially focusing, as he puts it, on source anonymisation. In other words, taking documents from anonymous sources, washing them or laundering them of any electronic fingerprints that could allow those documents to be traced back to the source, and then passing them to the media outlet that the source has asked them to forward the information to. So, for example, if he gets information and the source says, look, I rather like Russell Brown, he's got an excellent blog, I think you should give the information to him, but you know, he's a bit lazy, so tell him he's got 14 days, and if he doesn't do that, then he should pass them to Toby. And that's what they do. They give the information, they say the caveat is that you must get off your butt within 14 days, and that is put in there, inserted in there to, as he says, avoid the gatekeeping function that some media have.
And meanwhile, Toby, it would seem that Julian Assange, stuck in Britain, can't go anywhere else, doesn't want to go to Sweden, is seeing his stocks fall somewhat, even amongst serious investigative journalists. Is there a sense in which he's being taken less seriously now?
I think his stock probably started to fall the minute he became the story and became sort of foregrounded in the whole Wikileaks episode. He's still respected enormously. I think that's the important thing to remember, even though he may now not be taken so seriously as an operator or a source.
How much do you think the private eye thing with the implication of anti-Semitism has hurt him?
It's hard to say from this distance, but certainly it hasn't helped him at all. I mean, he's already been accused of misogyny quite widely, and we all know about the charges that are outstanding against him. He has issued a pretty strong denial, but his main denial was that he did not say Jewish conspiracy, and Hislop, the private eye editor, didn't actually directly accuse him of saying that. He hasn't denied talking about Jewish people involved, and you know, it has a pretty bad smell about it.
Do we have any real sense of who's in whose camp these days? We know that there are lots of people who've left, including Domscheit-Berg. How many people are there at Wikileaks? Is that clear?
It's not clear. I mean, there are still plenty of acolytes, and you know, he advertised for jobs not long before Christmas. I think, you know, he's you know, money's been difficult, but he's not quite on the breadline yet. Certainly, there have been a lot of people that have fallen out with him, and I think you know, at a certain point, it becomes pretty clear that you've got to say he can't be the only one marching in time.
Yes, just him. He's the one that's getting it right, and no one else is. Of course, the Guardian journalists have been having some fun speculating about who might play them in the prospective movie of WikiLeaks. Yeah, again, I sort of wonder whether they're taking it seriously enough.
I mean, I think it's important to understand the level on which that is happening. I mean, I've been joking myself about how there's a demand for a cameo for a small-time book editor on the beach in Auckland. So I don't think any of that undermines the seriousness with which the story is taken overall. That is to say, Assange certainly is now lampooned a bit, but I just would reiterate that people still accept that he's a visionary and that he's done some sort of frontier things that no one else could have. And now, though, I think now it's important for all sides to sort of take a deep breath of humility and start focusing attention on the things that matter, not even the media stuff necessarily, but on Bradley Manning, who is essentially in solitary confinement in a military prison in Virginia.
Under conditions that some people see as tantamount to torture.
Well, I think that's a reasonable assessment. He's been made to strip naked for the evening, and then when he reports for inspection in the mornings, he's still naked. He has to, I think, respond to guard requests every 5 minutes during the day. It sounds pretty horrible, and I think it's good that people are now putting attention on that. It's the right thing, and I think there's been a surprising lack of attention paid to it, and that's something to do, I suppose, with the Democratic administration, whereas if it had been George Bush, you would have probably seen more placards being raised.
What do you make of Manning himself? Is he a principal whistleblower, a board desk jockey? Where is he on the spectrum between those two?
It's hard to know an awful lot about him. The main kind of source material we have for that are these web chats that he allegedly had with someone called Adrian Lemo, who was a former hacker himself and ended up giving Manning up to the CIA. And they were printed, what purported to be these conversations were printed in Wire magazine. And in those, Manning makes it really clear that his interest, he uses the word public good. He's not, I mean, he's been charged with providing information to the enemy, whatever the enemy is. Well, it's pretty clear that he didn't want this information in the hands of the enemy. He wanted it in the hands of the media. He wanted it to be clean, and he was doing it because he was a patriot.
What do you make of that, John? Because it's a pretty serious issue when a leaker has now been charged with a capital crime. He's being charged with something tantamount to treason. Is that worrying for you as a journalist who sometimes is in receipt of leaks?
Yes, although fortunately the New Zealand government is not in the habit of responding as sadly the Obama administration and yet another stain on its less than stellar human rights reputation has acted in this case. And I think it's a very important issue. And the issue of his motivation, while of some interest to pundits, I think is in some ways irrelevant. He is a source, certain duties were owed to him. And we get leaked information from sources all the time with different agendas. Some of them are not particularly noble. They've been passed over for information, they hate their boss, whatever. As journalists, we in the business of analysing and assessing the credibility of the information. Sometimes the motivation comes into play, but he is owed certain duties as a source, and certainly he is owed certain duties by the state by virtue of his being a human.
You're not, I take it, in the camp of let's just put all the data out there and everything will be okay. I think you both acknowledge the role of journalism in actually developing and putting in context these stories. Absolutely.
I think that's something very important that has come out of WikiLeaks and has come out of Daniel Domscheit-Berg's statements that, that there's this huge tranche of information which, as he said, no one can really quite cope with, certainly not the reading public. And they need the mainstream media, for all its flaws, to sift that information, analyse it, as you say, to put it in context and put it before an audience. And I think that's, if anything, it has showed the importance of the mainstream media outlets like The Guardian, Der Spiegel, The New York Times, which have done, in my view, particularly The Guardian, a fantastic job. Much more work to do, of course. But the important thing is that WikiLeaks was seen by some people, I think, as a kind of magic bullet, that this was going to be a revolution in journalism. Of course it wasn't. It's achieved a great deal. It's very important. I think it's helped change people's mindsets in some way. But if anything, it seems to me that the lesson is that we need to rebuild and reconnect with viewers in the mainstream media so that those informations, when leaked, can have a very strong impact and outlet.
Toby, where do we go from here? Because we've barely begun to tap the 250,000 cables in Cablegate alone. What's going to happen to these stories? Because I get the sense that there is a certain fatigue about them.
I think only 5,000 of the 250,000-ish cables, which is what, 2% or something. So it's a tiny part of the tranche that's been released so far. They've now got into a phase where they're dealing with media partners outside the original ones, notwithstanding the falling out with The Guardian. So there are, I think, about 50 or 60 newspapers around the world that they're dealing with, and they're going to deal with NGOs as well. The problem, I guess, is just the sheer mass of it. And I think I probably agree with John in that the Cablegate and the war logs before them, we probably won't see the likes of that again, just in terms of the sheer volume. But there will be more leaks going on, and we'll see all sorts of different facilities developing, sometimes with open leaks, sometimes with newspapers themselves. Spiegel, El País, Guardian, New York Times are all developing their own drop boxes, which is a kind of drop and run encryption service where you can anonymously leave material.
I think we all agree that the world of public interest journalism has changed forever. And Julian Assange is not the only one who lives in a world filled with conspiracy. Jose Barbosa reviews the latest film in the series that claims to know what's really going on.
Did you know Jesus is basically the same as Ronald McDonald? Hegemony. And did you know pretty soon we're all going to be tracked by microchips in our faces? Index. Oh, you didn't? Hegemony index. Okay, keep your blinkers on. Keep your head in the sand, you bloody ostrich people.
These were the claims made in a documentary called Zeitgeist, released online 4 years ago and directed by Peter Joseph. It's become an internet phenomenon.
Have you guys seen Zeitgeist? It's the only film that shows you what's really going on. Also, does anyone have a good fake of Jessica Alba squatting over a bucket?
3 years later, and Joseph's at it again with the recently released Zeitgeist Moving Forward. The new film extols the virtues of the Venus Project, a movement dreamed up in the 70s by Jacques Fresco, an intense 94-year-old seen here being drilled on close-up.
You haven't got anything better to do?
No.
The Zeitgeist film's been getting quite a push by the local chapter of the Zeitgeist movement, a grassroots organisation created by Joseph to promote the ideas of the Venus Project by using the biggest words they can find.
It's a sustainability advocacy group seeking a transition out of the current monetary paradigm which is governing the entire world society into a new sustainable direction called a resource-based economy.
Basically, the film argues that capitalism and the free market are outdated, and the resulting drive to make money and to be more profitable is screwing over the planet and making us less happy. At least, I think that's what it's saying.
The money sequence of value has now completely decoupled from the foundational life interest, which could be termed the life sequence of value.
Joseph argues that the main driver of crime is poverty. So he says, if money's the problem, let's get rid of it.
With the removal of the money system and the necessities of life provided, we would see a global reduction in crime by about 95% almost immediately.
Oh yeah, 95% of all crime. That'll go, so get on board, why don't you?
Once we do away with money, that's when Jacques Fresco and his amazing screensavers come in. This future society will depend not on money, but on a centralised cyber system, which, it's claimed, will dole out resources scientifically, thus creating social equality. Suddenly, this all started to sound really familiar.
You see, money doesn't exist in the 24th century.
Are we seeing the start of the Federation here in New Zealand?
I wouldn't call it anything like a federation or anything like that. We're looking at one of the most creative directions the Earth has ever discovered.
And how does the film suggest we get to this amazing future? By symbolically throwing all our money back at the fat cats and storming off in a huff.
If you're interested in learning more about the relationship between economics, power and control, the truth is there are much better places to go to.
Peter Joseph seems to think making arguments accessible is the same as dumbing them down, so he doesn't even try.
The film has its fans and that's totally cool. All the people I met were nice and they seemed genuine. It's just that I think if you're trying to change the world, shouldn't you make a calm, reasoned argument for your solution? instead of trying to prove how clever you are.
Jose Barbosa going out to find the truth which is out there. And that's our show. Thanks to John Stevenson and Toby Manhire, and to you for watching. We'll be back with Media 7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.